The morning Mark Dawson lost his job began like any other. He woke before sunrise, packed his 12-year-old daughter Emma's lunch, braided her hair the best he could, and reminded her not to forget her science project. She smiled, hugged him tightly, and whispered, "Good luck today, Dad." Neither of them knew that within a few hours, everything would change. Mark had spent nearly 25 years working as a security and training supervisor for a private defense contractor. He wasn't the fastest anymore, and a few gray hairs had appeared around his temples, but his experience had saved countless lives. Younger employees often sought his advice whenever situations became dangerous. That morning, however, the atmosphere felt different. His manager called him into the conference room where several executives sat waiting with forced smiles. "Mark," one of them began, avoiding eye contact, "we're restructuring the company." He already knew what those words meant. "We appreciate your years of service, but we're moving in a younger direction." Mark frowned. "You mean you're firing me because of my age?" "No," another executive quickly replied. "We're simply looking for employees who better fit our future image." Future image. The phrase echoed in his mind. His performance reviews had always been excellent. He had never failed a fitness test. He had trained dozens of elite security specialists. Yet none of that mattered. They handed him a folder containing his severance package. As he packed his locker, several coworkers quietly shook his hand. Some looked embarrassed. Others couldn't even meet his eyes. One young employee whispered, "They're making a huge mistake." Mark simply smiled. "Maybe," he replied, "but getting angry won't change today." Outside the building, he sat inside his old pickup truck for nearly 10 minutes before starting the engine. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about Emma. The mortgage payment was due next week. School supplies weren't free. Her dream of attending summer science camp suddenly seemed impossible. Still, when he picked Emma up from school that afternoon, he forced a smile. "How was your day?" he asked. She excitedly showed him an A on her math test. Then she noticed something. "Dad, why are you home so early?" Mark hesitated before answering. "I got some unexpected time off." Emma looked at him carefully. She had always been able to read his face. "They fired you." He looked away. "I'm sorry." Instead of crying, Emma reached across the truck and squeezed his hand. "They're wrong." Those 3 simple words hit harder than the termination letter. That evening, after dinner, Mark sat at the kitchen table searching job listings. Every application seemed to ask for younger candidates with fewer years of experience and lower salary expectations. Hours passed with little hope. Then his phone buzzed. It was an old military friend named Jason. "Still in shape?" The message read. Mark smiled. "I manage." Jason replied almost immediately. "Good. There's a Navy SEAL selection event tomorrow. They're looking for civilian instructors, but the candidates think age equals weakness. Come watch, or better yet, participate." Mark laughed. "I wasn't invited." Jason answered with one final message. "You don't need an invitation. Sometimes the best introductions happen after people underestimate you." Mark looked toward Emma, who was asleep on the couch with her science book resting on her chest. For the first time all day, he felt something he hadn't felt since walking out of his office. Hope. Mark arrived at the military training facility just after sunrise. The air was cool, and the sounds of boots hitting pavement echoed across the grounds. Dozens of spectators stood behind metal barriers while instructors barked orders at a group of young Navy SEAL candidates preparing for a grueling fitness demonstration. Most of the candidates were in their 20s. They looked strong, confident, and eager to prove themselves. Mark quietly took a place near the back of the crowd, wearing faded jeans, an old jacket, and a baseball cap. No one paid much attention to him. Jason spotted him and walked over with a grin. "I knew you'd come." Mark smiled. "I only came to watch." "We'll see about that," Jason replied. The event began with a brutal obstacle course. Candidates climbed towering walls, crawled through thick mud, balanced across narrow beams, and carried heavy sandbags over long distances. Several stumbled from exhaustion. A few failed obstacles and had to start over. The instructors pushed them relentlessly. "Move faster. Pain is temporary. Your teammates are counting on you." The crowd applauded every successful finish, but it became clear that the course was far more difficult than it looked. During a short break, one instructor noticed Mark observing every movement with unusual focus. "You've got something to say?" the instructor asked. Mark shook his head politely. "No, sir. You've been watching like you already know every obstacle. I've seen similar courses before." One of the younger candidates overheard the conversation and laughed. "Maybe Grandpa wants to give us lessons." Several others chuckled. Mark ignored the comment. Jason folded his arms. You boys might want to be careful who you're teasing. The lead instructor looked at Mark with curiosity. You think you could complete this course? Mark hesitated. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. The crowd grew quiet. The instructor smiled. That wasn't my question. After a brief pause, Mark nodded. I'll give it my best. Some spectators laughed as Mark removed his jacket and stretched his shoulders. His movements were calm and controlled, not flashy. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged father rather than someone preparing for one of the toughest physical challenges imaginable. A whistle blew. Mark exploded off the starting line. He cleared the first wall in one smooth motion without wasting energy. Instead of relying on speed alone, he used perfect technique. Every step was efficient. Every movement had a purpose. The instructors exchanged surprised glances. He knows exactly what he's doing, one muttered. Mark crawled beneath the wire obstacle without touching a single strand. He crossed the balance beam with steady confidence while younger candidates had struggled to stay upright. At the sandbag carry, he lifted the heavy load onto his shoulder with practiced ease and maintained the same pace from start to finish. The crowd, which had laughed only minutes earlier, now stood in complete silence. As Mark reached the final obstacle, several candidates began cheering for him despite competing against him. They recognized the discipline behind every movement. With one final burst of effort, Mark crossed the finish line. He wasn't gasping for air. He simply took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and nodded respectfully to the instructors. The timer stopped. One instructor stared at the display in disbelief. Mark had completed the entire course faster than every candidate who had run that morning. The same young man who had mocked him lowered his head and walked over. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I judged you before I knew who you were. Mark smiled and extended his hand. Don't apologize for being young, he replied. Just remember that experience is something you earn, not something you can see. Before anyone could say another word, a senior commander stepped onto the field, looking directly at Mark with a smile of recognition. So, the commander said, it's been a long time, Master Instructor Dawson. I was wondering when you'd show up. The crowd fell silent once again. They suddenly realized the quiet single father wasn't just another spectator, he was a legend many of the instructors had learned about but never expected to meet in person. A wave of silence swept across the training field as the senior commander walked toward Mark with a broad smile. The younger candidates looked at one another, confused. Moments earlier, they had seen him as an ordinary middle-aged spectator. Now, every instructor on the field stood a little straighter. The commander stopped in front of Mark and offered a firm handshake. It's good to see you again, Master Instructor Dawson. Mark returned the handshake with a humble smile. It's been a long time, sir. The commander turned to face the crowd. For those of you who don't know this man, years ago Mark Dawson trained special operations personnel before many of today's instructors even began their careers. His lessons on discipline, leadership, and teamwork influenced generations of military professionals. The candidates stared at Mark in disbelief. The young man who had mocked him earlier stepped forward once more. Sir, I had no idea. Mark placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. None of us knows another person's story at first. That's why respect should always come before judgment. Several candidates nodded quietly, taking his words to heart. The commander then made an unexpected announcement. Our training staff has an opening for a senior instructor. I'd like to offer that position to Mark Dawson, effective immediately. The audience burst into applause. Mark stood silently for a moment before answering. I truly appreciate the offer. It means a great deal. Everyone waited for his response. But I'd like to decline. The applause faded into surprised murmurs. The commander raised an eyebrow. May I ask why? Mark smiled. Yesterday, a company looked at my gray hair and decided my best years were behind me. Today, you've reminded me that experience still has value. Instead of returning to someone else's organization, I want to build something that helps people who are overlooked because of their age, background, or circumstances. The commander nodded with respect. I understand. And if you ever need our support, you have it. Within days, a spectator's video of Mark's obstacle course spread across social media. Millions of people watched the quiet father outperform candidates half his age, not because he was stronger, but because he was disciplined, patient, and efficient. News outlets shared the story. Interview requests poured in. Soon afterward, the executives who had fired Mark contacted him. We'd like to discuss bringing you back, one of them said over the phone. We may have made the wrong decision. Mark thanked them politely. I've already found my next mission. A few months later, Mark opened his own Leadership and Resilience Academy. People from all walks of life enrolled: young athletes, veterans, first responders, parents, and professionals looking to build confidence and mental toughness. His lessons weren't only about fitness. He taught integrity. He taught responsibility. He taught that true strength is measured by how you treat others when no one is watching. Emma proudly helped at the academy after school, greeting new students with a smile. She often remembered the day her father came home after losing his job. What had seemed like the worst day of their lives had become the beginning of something far greater. One afternoon, as the sun set over the training field, Emma looked at the long line of students waiting for her father's next class. She smiled and said, "Dad, remember when they said you were too old?" Mark laughed softly. "I do." She grinned. "I think they confused age with experience." Mark looked at the students preparing for another lesson and nodded. "They gave me a reason to start over." Sometimes the greatest opportunities arrive disguised as rejection. The students gathered around as he blew the whistle to begin another session. This time, no one saw an aging man. They saw a leader whose greatest strength had never been his speed, it had always been his character. The end.